Hi everyone. I've been asked to talk about some of the basic grammar of social media, in particular two symbols which you will probably have seen all over the place on pretty much every social platform there is, and they are the @ symbol and the hash symbol. Now these two both originated on Twitter. They were part of the grammar of that platform, but they were fairly quickly adopted by Facebook and later Instagram and all of the other platforms, largely because of a thing called Jacob's Law, which basically says that when people use a particular system and are used to it and are used to how it all works, they would like every system they use to function in the same way, so they don't have to learn new conventions from scratch every time, which makes a lot of sense, which is why Facebook and all the others just went with these symbols and they are now pretty universally recognised. So I'll just run through the differences between the two of them and why you might use them, particularly as an artist who's trying to promote yourself. So let's start off with the one which is probably slightly more important, which is the @ symbol. Now this symbol is used to refer to an organisation or a person or a brand, basically another entity which has an account on a particular platform you're using. So just in the same way someone might use the @ symbol to tag you, that you can use it to tag anyone else, whether it's a friend or another band or a particular organisation. And when you do this so you start with the @ symbol and then put the person's username after it. This is commonly known as their handle. And on Twitter, that is often easy to find. It's at the top of their Twitter profile. A lot of people have it on their websites. On places like Facebook, it can be a little bit harder to identify, but on pretty much all the platforms, if you just use the search bar at the top and just type in a person's name, more often than not, you'll be able to find what their handle is fairly easily if they have an account on that platform. And it's important to keep in mind with the @ symbol that you can only use handles that exist. You can't just make it up and hope for the best. So if you wanted to tag a particular organisation, English Folk Expo, say, you wouldn't just be able to guess what it might be unless you were lucky and got it right. You would need to actually check what their handle is. This is different when you come to hashes, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And when you use someone's handle in a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram post or anything like that, the person in question will then receive a notification and they can then come along and see what you've written, and they can either comment on it or like it or share it or completely ignore it if they're a bit rude. And there are plenty of reasons that you might opt to do this. And it all comes down to the social in social media, which, I mean, it might seem obvious to say, but the whole point of all of these platforms is that it's about interaction and getting other people to talk about the things that you're doing and the things that you're interested in. So, a common use might be, for example, if you are playing a festival and you're on the same bill as a few other artists, or if you just made an album with a few other people, you may want to tag all those people because they will want to talk about the same thing that you are. So if you're playing a festival, you might want to say, I'm really excited to be on the lineup with all of these people. And then they will see your tweet, they might well share it, and then their audience will see what you've said, and they'll see, more importantly, that you exist, and they might like to kind of find out more about you. And it's all about this kind of cross-pollination of audiences which happens when people interact and talk about the same things each other's talking about. Similarly, on an album, you might want to tag all the people who played on your album, and then if they have audiences, or even if they don't, they might interact with you, and then that original post just goes further, gets seen by more people, gets your message out there. On Twitter, there are a few little quirks to be aware of which don't necessarily apply to the other platforms in the same way. If you begin a tweet with someone's handle, so if the very first character in your tweet is the @ symbol, Twitter will interpret that as a tweet directed at somebody. You are talking to them, and while it will be visible publicly, anyone will be able to see it, it won't necessarily show up on the main page in your profile. It may well not show up in other people's feeds, so it won't go nearly as far. That's fine if that's how you are intending to use it. However, if you are just simply starting a sentence by referring to another person or organisation, For example, if you're saying Global Music Match is a wonderful project to be a part of, then there is a convention. It's not kind of a written in stone rule, but it's a very common thing people do, which is you would just start the tweet with a full stop or a period, just so you've got one character in front of the @ symbol, and that will just stop Twitter reading it as a kind of tweet directed at somebody. It will just show it up as normal in all the usual places, and that just gives you the freedom to start a sentence with someone's name but still use their handle in that way while still being able to show your tweet to everybody. Facebook and Instagram don't have that same problem. You can use the @ symbol at the beginning, the middle, or the end, wherever you want. So do always use it whenever you are talking about a particular project. Do always remember to stop and think about who else is involved in what you're doing, because the more you can get other people involved in your conversation, the wider your comments will go, and the bigger your reach is in general, which can only be a good thing. Now let's talk about the hash, which visually, when you look at kind of how it's used, it might look quite similar and is sometimes used in what appears to be fairly similar contexts. But the important difference is the hash is used to denote a topic quite often. So you're probably familiar with the term hashtag. That is when you put a hash symbol at the start and then put a word or a few words shoved together. That is a hashtag. And those are most common on Twitter, but you do get them across all platforms. Now, the most common use of a hashtag is normally when you're referring to an event or a campaign where the people behind it have sat down and decided what they want their hashtag to be. And then they will put it on all their marketing materials, they will use it liberally on their channels and encourage other people to use it so that there is a unified conversation going on around this string of characters. And so, for example, a really, one you've no doubt come across is Black Lives Matter, which has been going around recently and is still going really strong as a campaign. So you will see hash Black Lives Matter across a lot of tweets and things. And what that does is whenever anyone tweets something using that hashtag Black Lives Matter, then anyone who clicks on the hashtag or kind of follows it in their trends or even just searches for it in the search box, they will then see all the tweets or kind of a good selection that are discussing this particular hashtag. So it's a really good way of creating a large conversation, sometimes a global conversation around a particular topic. If you talk about it but you don't use the hashtag, then your message will only be able to get so far, because people who are actively seeking out content about that topic won't necessarily be able to find it. So whenever you're playing at a festival is particularly a good one. Always make sure that you check if the festival have got their own hashtag that they are using and other people are talking about. I worked on the Folk on Foot festivals, which many of you might be familiar with, and particularly for the first festival we used the hashtag FrontRoomFest. And that was really good, particularly in this kind of coronavirus lockdown weirdness. We were able to see that people across the country and beyond were actually kind of engaging with what we were doing and talking about it. And in that context, but also in normal times, it's just a really good way to be able to pool a conversation together from people who aren't sharing the same physical space. Other uses of hashtags can sometimes just be if you want to just casually refer to a particular emotion or something. If you were tweeting, I've had a really long and hard day, you might say hashtag sleepy, hashtag very tired, just casual little things like that, which sometimes just add content to it. You can sometimes use them for little asides and jokes as well if you feel so inclined and feeling like you want to be a bit more creative with them. On Instagram as well, hashtags do definitely get your posts a bit more of a reach, particularly if you check what kind of hashtags other people are using and what are kind of well-established ones. So for example, musicians of Instagram is a very common hashtag that you'll see quite a lot on that platform. And a lot of people will just kind of check in on that hashtag and just because they want a load of music content. So if you are kind of posting photos related to your music or videos of you playing, that's a really good hashtag to use, or just more general things like hashtag musician, hashtag violin, if that's what you're playing. And a nice thing about Instagram is that when you use a hashtag, it'll tell you how many people are talking about those hashtags. So if you find one which is of a reasonable size, then it's good to include it if it's relevant, because then you're more likely to be seen by people who are interested in that topic. Other uses you might use is you can use them for your own projects. Now, it's worth bearing in mind here that those hashtags aren't going to be getting kind of millions of uses. They're not going to be showing up in the trends necessarily, unless you're a particularly prolific artist. But if you're releasing an album, say, if you just use hashtag your album title, that can just be a nice way of firstly pulling your content together, so there's some continuity going on. Hashtags stand out a bit more than just kind of casual words, so people will see it immediately when you're tweeting about it. They'll be able to see at a glance what you're talking about. And also, if you do have a fan base which is going to be talking about your work, just seeing that you're using that hashtag will encourage them to use it as well, even if you don't make a big deal about it in your marketing. And it's just a nice way of bringing together what can be a micro conversation, but it's the same principles apply to those small conversations as to the big conversations, really. That it's just worth pulling together that conversation and having it there. One thing to note on Facebook with hashtags is that while you can use them, and there's all the functionality for it, and they'll be, if you use one, then it'll show up and people can search for them in exactly the same way as all the other platforms, it's just a much less common thing to do on Facebook, and they're much less valuable on Facebook, really. So, go right ahead and use them. You feel more than welcome, but you probably won't see other people using them as much, and you won't necessarily notice that they get you much more of a reach. So it's up to you, really, whether you want to use them on that platform, but absolutely use them on Twitter, absolutely use them on Instagram. Don't go crazy on Twitter with the number of hashtags. Obviously, you're limited in the number of characters anyway, so pick and choose the relevant ones and the ones that you think are going to get you more reach. On Instagram, feel free to use them a lot more liberally. You'll quite often see people at the bottom of their Instagram posts just having a big block of hashtags. You can include up to 30 in a particular post, so just find any that interest you, and there's no character limit, so go crazy, use it as many as you like. And that's kind of it, really. Often the best way to kind of really understand and get to grips with these particular tools is just to try them and use them and see what other people are doing. Really, it's quite hard to get it wrong, so just try it out, and the more you use them, the more you'll get to grips with the best use of them. So go play.